Here's a depiction of the famous library at Alexandria. This is a more Athenian type look at it here. In the center of the floor is that famous chi-rho combined symbol that we talked about, and of course how that works with chi-rho in Egypt itself. But again, this is a more Athenian type aspect. You can see these scrolls and all these cubbies here that are wrapped up. A lot of people don't think about it, but some of these scrolls were multiple pages, and instead of being page to page, they were actually stuck back to back and rolled up onto these scrolls. Some of which were only just a couple of pages. Other ones could have been quite extensive or broken into parts. And there were multiple copies, of course, of each one of these. But just this guy over here at the right looking at that, if one was to take the fables of the Greeks and what we know of Aesop's fables and so on, it would probably take up more than this space that's allotted here on the right. In some sayings and depictions, they had these people around the room and their depictions of Homer, Socrates, and so on, and then a lot of the books down that run, almost like a Dewey Decimal System, were having to do with them and works about them and so on. But of course it wouldn't have been one little alcove and some stretches off, or one building with a little outskirt like this. Later we'll see another depiction. What treasures were lost in the destruction of the great museum at Alexandria? People don't think of it as being a museum, but they had accrued themselves a huge amount of archaic knowledge in there. And everybody tries to say it's what Egypt knew and all this stuff. It's not necessarily what Egypt knew at all. For this is in the time of Alexander doing this in the first place. And sure, there are a lot of writings from Egypt, but it's well known that he was taking any writings and books that he could from anybody that came into that port from anywhere around the world. So it wouldn't have been just about that. This needs to go down. The Monumental Museum of Alexandria was famous for its legendary library, the tragic story of the building's destruction. Oh my God, we're not going to start doing this, are we? The tragic story about the building's destruction continues to be a painful one for people who love ancient history and literature. Philosophy actually means the love of knowledge. So what treasures were lost in this devastating fire? Well, the museum, or mausoleum, was a home to art, to music, to poetry, and philosophy. It's extremely difficult to find out exactly what was located on the shelves of the library, but generations of passionate researchers have created some possible list of the Lost Scrolls authors. The brain center of Alexander's city, where Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great, whose heart was conquered by, my God, I'm just going to reload. I have to beg your forgiveness, people. I'm not going to sit and just edit out this crap back and forth and try to get it, because it edits in about a minute and a half states, and whenever it does, I always cut out something that I say, and it makes it look like a real sloppy edit, and it makes it cut off, and it's even worse than me just letting it reload here and going back to it. Generations of researchers have created some possible lists of the Lost Scrolls. Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great, whose heart was conquered by the beauty of the country that's near the Nile. After his death, his friend, or perhaps stepbrother, Ptolemy, became the Pharaoh of Egypt. Ptolemy was also the creator of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Alexander and Ptolemy were both students of the famous philosopher Aristotle, and his teachings influenced the museum's creation. However, Demetrius of Phalerum and Theophrastus, student, was likely one who proposed the idea even to Ptolemy. Here's a statue of it, and you can see the little Greek look that's in it, but also in holding the stasis and this arm posture. This was actually an Egyptian statue, and especially you can tell when you get down here to the bottom, Even though he's wearing the Greek sandals of the time, he's actually taking that first step forward in that Greek stance. This is a statue of Demetrius. Quite a few times I've talked about, let's go up here and look at when I say this. This is Demetrius. And quite often I've told you that these people weren't named for what they were named whenever they were a kid. They got renamed whenever they had done something neat, something that stood out about itself. In fact, Demetrius, it comes out to like Demeter, the god itself, and Demetrius had found the god of measurements, meter, that we know about it. Our mother, it also goes with, by the way, in D, or Dio, has to do with that. A lot of these names, of course, are not what they were named when they were a kid, because it has to do with what knowledge they brought forth to humanity. Egypt was a country of free thinkers. In the Hellenistic world, many sciences like astronomy or anatomy were forbidden. But scientists in Egypt could voice even the most rebellious theories and explore any field of science. This allowed an openness that made things happen that in other places couldn't. In a modern day, you might see a portion of that trying to hamper humanity and civilization right now. Therefore, many researchers wanted to go to the museum and study. Therefore, later they donate their documents to the library so others could learn about their achievements and what they had put together. It is likely that no one else followed as director of the museum after Aristarchus of Samothrace stopped holding the role in or about 145 BC. Aristarchus was one of the famous guys. He was the one who figured out the circumference of the earth because he had seen some literature about it, and the fact that way up in Syene there was no shadow in a well during the longest day of the year, which was celebrated with this festival and so on. But where he went outside apparently on that day, and there was a shadow, and he checked the monument pole that was there, and no, it's exactly plumbed up. So how could that happen? In the process of figuring how far on a ball that something would cast a shadow, and then having somebody pace off all the way to Syene and back, figuring out that amount, figuring out the different distance, it showed him the circumference of a ball and how big that would be. And then it said, well, if that's the portion, this is how big the earth is. And he was really within a small portion of true. It's almost impossible nowadays to get too much better of an idea of what he had until we had modern satellites and so on. But then again, he's at Egypt, and what's crazy about that is the Pyramid of Egypt is much more accurate than even he is. It's also pointing towards direct north. And the circumference around actually is just like our declamations of longitude and latitude. And degrees of latitude that we currently use today, strung around 360 degrees of a ball, if you were to go all the way around the Great Pyramid, covers this exact same section in the latitude that the pyramid is in. Oh, that's incredible. It gets worse than that. The height ratio versus the width ratio on the Great Pyramid shows that they understood that the planet was actually thicker at the middle than at the top. In fact, the differential of those two is pretty damn accurate, although we don't know exactly where the top of it was, and there's all this speculation about it. If you use one of the figures, which is real common, it comes out perfect. When Strabo visited the museum, he was overwhelmed by the awesomeness of the Temple of Knowledge. The Roman Emperor Claudius added another building to the complex, and with time the research center moved to the famous Alexandrian Serapeum. In 387 AD, the Roman writer Ammianus Marcellinus wrote about the site, and he said, besides this, there are many lofty temples, and especially one to Serapis, which is a conflagration of Egyptian and Greek gods. which all no words can adequately describe it. We might yet say, from its splendid halls supported by pillars, and its beautiful statues and other embellishments, it is so superbly decorated that the next to the capital of which the ever vulnerable Rome boasts, the whole world has nothing worthier. God, it's not going to do this again, is it? Hello? Plug that in. The ever venerable Rome boasts, the whole world has nothing worthier of admiration. In it were libraries of inestimable value, and the concurrent testimony of ancient records affirm that 70,000 volumes, which had been collected by the anxious care of Ptolemies, were burnt in the Alexandrian War when the city was sacked at the time of Caesar the dictator. Alexandria itself was not, like other cities, gradually embellished, but at its very outset it was adorned with spacious roads. But after having been long torn by violent seditions, at last, when Aurelian was emperor, and the intestine quarrels of its citizens had proceeded to deadly strife, its walls were destroyed, and it lost the large half of its territory, which was called Brunchion, and had long been the abode of eminent men. So in other words, during the event which looks like a earthquake, part of that portion just slid off into the Gulf, and we have actually found some of it now. There had lived Aristarchus, that illustrious grammarian, and Herodotus, that accurate inquirer into the fine arts, and Saccus Ammonius, the master of Plutonus, and in many other writers in various useful branches of literature, among whom Didymus, who is surnamed Calcentrius, a man celebrated for his writings on many subjects of science, deserves special mention, who in the 6 books, in which he sometimes incorrectly attacked Cicero, imitating those malignant farce writers, is justly blamed by the learned as a puppy barking from a distance with its puny voice against the mighty roar of the lion. Here again we see another depiction of what it may have looked like in the Library of Alexandria. Some see this as being a little more accurate, for this was not done in the straight Greek ideal, but actually done in the idea of the Egyptians, and you can see Hathor's head adorning the top of columns rather than them looking the way they were before. And you can see these men working here as an ancient Egyptian and an Egyptian, along with these Greeks that are here. So the city he described did not exist for much longer. A bishop soon destroyed the heritage of many generations of ancient minds in the name of a new faith. In 391 AD, the beautiful Temple of Wisdom was ruined. There's no evidence of the existence of the library after that date, but it seems that the people of Alexandria, the legendary philosophers, scientists, and their supporters, saved some of the books. However, in 642 AD, when the city was captured by the Muslims, they burned all the books not related to Islam and that they found in the public places, and therefore that was the end of the knowledge of the Library of Alexandria, although the people that contained it and held it to that point weren't letting the scientists actually a hold of it very much. It was just something in stasis. Excuse me. The museum's priceless collection. It is known that Cleopatra VII spent hours at the library. The ancient Egyptian scrolls were full of knowledge collected by priests on papyri from the earliest days of civilization. Some people believe that the library once held documents describing the achievements of Imhotep and the Grand Vizier who created the step pyramid of Djoser, but unfortunately those were also lost. So we could have had an ideal, or where they came up with the idea of it here, this pyramid of Djoser, which is the first actual pyramid if you want to go with it. But everybody that's deep into it understands that this was an ancient mastaba, just like the Sumerians had. Yeah, kind of means table or bench. and they built over it something much larger and then staircased it up using sacred geometry. Yeah, even the pyramid that's bent, and they say that it was all this and that, was actually made like that for a reason. That's for other videos, though. The museum was home to 1,000 scholars at one point in time. They didn't pay taxes, but had to lecture, conduct research, and translate texts from Persian, Jewish, and Assyrian. Some of the ancient scientists who studied and performed experiments in the museum were Hero of Alexandria, who was known as the father of mechanics, but yet he had also already made a steam engine at this point, right before, poof, and then it goes away. Let me interject right here. You know, Arthur C. Clarke, the very famous sci-fi writer, made a statement one time I heard whenever I was a kid. He said that if they would have took the knowledge of the Library of Alexandria instead of freaking out on religion and saying that that knowledge was bad like a witch or something onto it, within 300 years of the point that we're talking about, we probably would have been in the Industrial Revolution, and there would have been something much different, and things that would have been steam-powered deals going around at this time. In fact, long before now, 1,000 years before, we would already have been able to go to space and the things like that, because we were headed that way, and there was over 1,000 years worth of hampering that went on, and then man had to re-blossom out of the Renaissance to get there back. Kind of blew me away when he said it, but then as I studied off into it, I go, oh, I see what you're saying. They knew a lot of knowledge. And then as I got deeper into it and found that the Sumerians had ancient trigonometry and everything, the planets and so on, it's like, oh man, these people knew even more than Arthur C. Clarke knew about, and oh my gosh. So he's known as the father of mechanics, but also a steam jet engine. Euclid, the father of geometry and sacred geometries, but it goes back much, much earlier. And Archimedes, the father of engineering. But you know, the Archimedes screw and so on, we've already, even just in recent videos, talked about how this was already going on in the ancient Babylon, in the 7 ancient wonders of the world, how that the gardens of Babylon that everybody talks about were fed by these ancient screw type networks, and they were using them in ancient Samaria, and then had lost that technology due to the Akkadians and things that went on through then and the end of the Bronze Age. But I guess that's for another damn video, isn't it? But it's known by many works by Callimachus and Eratosthenes, Herophilus, Hipparchus, and Pappus. Theon and his daughter Hypatia, in her early work, were once part of the library too. Yeah, some of these guys are so smart, and even my daughter caught on. Check out the crap she came up with. In fact, people have said St. Catherine of Alexandria is a fictional person based basically on Hypatia of Alexandria. Here looks like somebody in more of a modern day in the Renaissance or something, but it was painted during that time. But this is actually Archimedes, drawn by Feti in 1620. And if you look, he had a square, he had a compass and things working out, sacred geometry, figuring out the size of the world and all these things that go on to it. But his world is an astroglobe, and it has constellations on it instead. It's working on things in a different way. So many famous philosophers, zoologists, biologists, and other researchers worked on the museum. Therefore, the building contains several unique texts. Moreover, the Ptolemies brought many ancient scrolls, including texts by Homer, Sappho, and other ancient writers, but the books were only the part of the collection. There are also many prototypes for inventions, priceless pieces of art, etc. Most of these works were never copied and did not survive in other collections. Like you talked about all of these ancient Greeks, a lot of them we don't have the works anymore. We had what other people said about it, or they were trying to correct one part of what he said, and we don't even know the whole extent of what it was. Researchers are still working to unveil the wonderful story of that museum. Unfortunately, no matter how long they work, nothing will ever recover the burnt scrolls, which are of course lost forever. Let me know what y'all think down below, and we'll get on to another one. I've got another video loaded up we could do about underwater aquatic astrology or archaeology in this same gulf and how they had found the city. But there are some great statues and things that are found, but there's not going to be any scrolls, and it's too bad they weren't using Sumerian clay tablets, because some of those would still be extant versus some type of paper or vellum. Peace.